and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Tonight is Tuesday, the 15th of January 2019. And tonight's topic is, would Attorney General Barr fire Mueller and go after the deep state? I listened to the confirmation hearings today for Mr. Barr, and essentially the two sides want to know. On the Democratic side, they want to know if Barr is going to allow Mueller to continue his investigation unimpeded, whether he would fire Mueller. And the Republicans want to know, what about Hillary? What about the basis for the Mueller investigation in the first place? And we're going to go through some of the comments. I think it was very telling, and I think I understand, if he's nominated, what will actually happen. And it'll be different than when Attorney General Sessions was the Attorney General. But we'll get into that as we go further into the program. But we're also going to cover the gold and silver prices. We're going to cover the cryptocurrency prices. And then we're also going to get into some Moronica. A couple of good ones today. I got to discuss the shutdown on the wall, and then we'll finally get into the Bill Barr hearings, and there's some news on Brexit as well that we've got to cover. All right, let's look at the gold and the silver prices. Now, today in the market, we saw the equity prices rise again. This is one of the best Januaries in a long time, coming off of that bad December. Now, whether this is just some type of bounce in a bear market, or whether this is just a resumption of the bull market, remains to be seen. But we do know that the plunge protection team did meet on December 24th, and we had Trump pump and Powell put, meaning Trump pumping the market himself on Twitter, making comments about the stock market, and then the Fed through Powell talking about how they can remain patient. And they're starting to talk down now, rate hikes. And ever since that December 24th meeting, the Dow Jones is up about 13%. So it's quite a big move up higher. And today the Dow was up 155 points, up 0.65%. And it crossed the 24,000 mark. And it is at 24,065 at the close. Big day on NASDAQ, Netflix, and so on. Up 1.71%, closing above 7,000 to 7,023. That was up 117 points, almost 118 points. And the S&P 500 also turned in a more than 1% gain, rising 1.07% to 2610. And that was a 27.69 gain. Now, I mentioned Brexit. The proposal that Theresa May, the Prime Minister of England, put forth was rejected soundly by Tories and by the Labour Party, and now Jeremy Corbyn is saying we need to have a vote of confidence on this woman once again. Now, it's not quite sure how all this is going to work out. They've got 3 days to put another proposal together. There's a number of scenarios. We're not going to go through all of them tonight. But what's interesting is that when Brexit was first put on the table back in 2016, when the vote was first taken, you will recall the aftermath of that was that gold and silver prices went soaring, the pound fell, and the dollar rose. And that was because of all the issues that were going to happen, this parade of horribles, the uncertainty, and so on. Well, now that it looks like it might happen, or won't happen, or will happen in a different way, today we saw a muted response in the dollar. The dollar had risen most of the day, but when the announcement was made, didn't really change the dynamic. The dollar index closed around 96. And gold, as you see, didn't really react at all, as they say in England. It really, towards the end of the day, you can see there's not much of a reaction. And gold fell $2.56, down 0.2%. Silver was similarly unaffected by the news, and silver closed at 1557. That's where it is now. Both gold and silver about in the aftermarkets where they close. Excuse me. Now, what did that do for the unsustainable gold-silver ratio, the one that's supposed to be 16 to 1, 9 to 1, or 1 to 1? Well, it went up a little bit, There you go. Still hovering well over 80 to 1. And remember, this gold-silver ratio was unsustainable, and it was 50 to 1, and it was a strong buy. Convert your gold into silver when it was 60 to 1, and then it was 70 to 1, and this was ridiculous. It can't go any higher. Then it went to 80 to 1. Well, now it's at 83 to 1, and we're still hearing that the gold-silver ratio is out of whack. All right, I'm not going to get into that one tonight. We've covered that many, many times. But let's move now on to the cryptocurrencies. And the cryptos had a weird day. They had risen sharply and had been ahead of the game. And then there was a big dump with all of them a few hours ago. And then they've crawled back a bit. But the net result over the last 24 hours is Bitcoin at 35.79, down 2.25%. Bitcoin Cash at 127, down nearly 5%. Ethereum took a big dive, down to 119.66 cents, down almost 7%, and Litecoin hovering around $31 or down 4%. Now there's been this story, and these are the types of stories that get a lot of clicks and people get all excited. It's almost like the gold-backed yuan game changer. Well, this one is and it was reported as if it was a fact. I saw it in Zero Hedge. I saw it in The Independent. Russia's preparing an investment in Bitcoin to replace the dollar as a reserve currency in a bid to tackle U.S. sanctions. Well, first of all, there's no story on this whatsoever. There's a guy. He says he works as an economist at the Kremlin, whatever that means. And he says this may happen as early as next month. Now, the market obviously doesn't believe this because there's no big volume in Bitcoin. There's no accumulation in anticipation of this, but there's a lot of people that believe it. Now, this story actually makes more sense than the gold-backed yuan game changer for a couple of reasons. I would think that adding Bitcoin to reserves doesn't make a stitch of sense. A reserve asset is supposed to have some modicum of a store of value. It's supposed to be something that you can put on your reserves and know that you have a certain amount that's going to be there a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now. You're not really supposed to be worrying where the price is. And other than the Swiss National Bank, which appears to be its own investment bank, most central banks don't buy risky stocks. They don't invest in speculative assets. Swiss bank notwithstanding. And the Central Bank of Russia has been very prudent in its reserve management. It has added gold. It had added U.S. treasuries. It has other currencies. And it's increased its reserve assets to almost $500 billion. They're almost at $500 billion. Now, according to this particular story, and I'll show you where it came from, there's a guy. His name is Vladislav Ginko, and he claims that the Russian government is going to do this, and they're going to probably buy $10 billion. There he is. That's his name, Vladislav Ginko. And his screen name is Martik. I don't know how you get that from that. But anyway, he is saying in Russia that the Bitcoin adoption will be when the Russian government I'm working for will start investing almost 470 billion reserves into Bitcoin. Now, we know that Russia throws out propaganda, but I'm not sure what propaganda value they gain out of saying they're going to do this through this guy. He's the only guy that has said it. There's been no official communique about this. Now, it's possible that Russia doesn't have to be transparent and they can float a trial balloon, and that's all this could be. It's possible that they're considering this, but I think $10 billion out of $470 billion, well, that's not a great percentage. It doesn't make much sense for a bank at this stage of the game to invest in an asset as a reserve asset, one that'll sit on their reserves, and then that $10 billion can end up being $1 billion, can end up being worthless. And I'm not sure when you're trying to build stable reserves that buying Bitcoin makes the most sense. Now, it may make sense for countries like Iran, Russia, and so on, who are under sanctions, can't use the SWIFT system, want to transact, well, then it makes sense for them to buy Bitcoin, but only in amounts necessary to conduct the transactions at hand, not necessarily hold Bitcoin as a reserve, and then you're subject to the prices. It would make sense if you're going to have a deal and you know the terms and the dates of the transaction to convert your currencies at the time of the transaction so that there's no currency risk that you take when you send it. And then, of course, on the other side, they have to come up with a mechanism to process that payment back into whatever. Now, it might make sense to hold a few, but for the most part, I doubt that Bitcoin is working on adding Bitcoin. I mean, that Russia is working on adding Bitcoin to her reserves. They just seem to be too prudent about the way they've gone about managing their reserves that to throw Bitcoin into the mix doesn't make a lot of sense. But another thing the guy said was that the main driver of the U.S. current government shutdown is the will of crooked Democrats to put brakes on the advent of backed on the crypto market. This dispute over the wall is only a disguise. Now, we see a lot of people. There's now a lot of conspiracies about why the government is closed down. And now, this guy, I think, loses even more credibility by saying that. I don't think that the main driver of the government shutdown was that a backed, oh, by the way, what backed is a consortium among Microsoft, Boston Consulting Group, New York Stock Exchange, and Starbucks to bring a Bitcoin futures exchange onto the market, which many people believe if that comes out, is approved, you'll get a lot of institutional investment into Bitcoin, and that would drive not only the price higher, but also adoption, because one of the goals of backed is to also allow people to convert the Bitcoin that they receive after they have futures contracts and they get the Bitcoin delivered, is the ability to convert that into fiat so they can spend it at places like Starbucks. Now, I'm not sure that the Democrats would close the government over that, the way he describes it, the crooked Democrats. So I think this guy is just out there making a name for himself. Now, sometimes there are people that are out there, like stories like in the National Enquirer, that do turn out to be correct. And they're based on not this person's knowledge or this person's analysis, but there's some truth perhaps to what we're talking about. And I think what might happen is that Russia may do some may already be doing transactions using Bitcoin, just as we don't know what countries do. We assume they're going to be transacting on the SWIFT system. Well, to avoid sanctions, we've seen the United States actually, to get the Iran deal done, they sent over pallets of $100 bills. So it's quite possible that countries are already transacting in the gold trade node or sending over bits of, bars of gold. Who would know? Who would stop? Or they could be transacting in Bitcoin as well. But I don't think that Russia's going to come out, make an announcement saying we've just added $10 billion worth of Bitcoin to our reserves, and now it's a reserve asset along with the dollar, the yen, the euro, and the yuan are the main currencies that they have in the reserves. When he added this whole thing that the purpose of the government shutdown was to stop the backed, that just didn't make much sense. Now, this guy goes one step further. He then says, this is Vladislav Ginko, tomorrow I will talk with Draper Yu of Tim Draper for possible cooperation to further Bitcoin adoption in Russia. The news are evolving. Now, I checked out Tim Draper's Twitter. He doesn't seem to be talking about this. And that guy, I mean, if there was something like this, he'd be all over it. He loves talking about Bitcoin, how it's going to be, I don't want to say the number he said because I don't know what it is, but it's some outlandish number in the future. In a couple of years, Bitcoin's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So he would be talking about Russian adoption too. Seems this guy is the only guy who's talking about it, but that hasn't stopped big stories in the Independent, the Telegraph, the Zero Hedge, and others. And of course, people talk about it, and if it gets repeated, hey, did you hear Russia's buying Bitcoin? Yeah, and China is going to have a gold-backed yuan game changer. Well, here I got to give credit to CNN, not CNN, but this news outlet covers cryptocurrencies. They say why Russia is probably not planning a $10 billion Bitcoin buy, and I tend to agree with them. Although, I don't rule it out. But based on... The story is only based on Vladimir, whatever his name is, and until we actually see it, I doubt it. All right, let's move on now to the wall. This is an interesting story because there are now a lot of conspiracy theories around shutting down the government because they're preparing for something and what's coming, and you hear all this kind of stuff just because the government is shut down. I think it's a pretty simple reason why the government is shut down. Is they couldn't agree to a budget, and the president refused to. Well, they did agree, and the president said, "I'm not signing that budget unless you have my wall in it." It seems to be pretty simple. Doesn't seem like a ruse or a guise to create a shutdown so they can do some type of nefarious activity. But people want to believe that stuff. But there was a story here in the Daily Caller. And I thought it was interesting because he said he works for the president. He supports a shutdown. If you read the story, he talks about how the shutdown is good and he wants to keep it shut down pretty much because he thinks that those 600,000 workers aren't really doing much, and a lot of them are non-productive, and in some cases worse than non-productive. They're actually working at cross purposes, and I guess you can think of those videos by Andrew O'Keefe where you have people saying the part of the resistance, and they're actively working against the government plans. But this guy is saying, and who knows who he is, and I don't know, when you approach a reporter to publish something like this, because the New York Times has done this too. They say, oh, this guy's a close president, he's in the presidential circle, and then they publish these op-eds, and you don't know who they are. And you don't even know if they're just making this stuff up. And of course, they'll never tell you. But let's assume this guy is correct. What he's saying is that there are a lot of non-essential government employees that are essentially still on the payroll. Now, this would lead to a much larger discussion is when you shut the government down and no one really notices other than the people that work there, which of course it means something to them. But if the services are non-essential, then you have to ask, why do you have non-essential government workers on the payroll? Because if you can shut it down and no one notices it other than the people who are relying on the paycheck, then calls into question, is the government too big? So it's an interesting article there, but another conspiracy theory that they did this to shut down the government so that they can go on, and then these people will never come back, and this is a way of making government even smaller. All right, what else do we got for now? So, the Bitcoin... Oh, yeah, we got to do Moronica, so that's what I was waiting for. Okay, well, Moronica's on its way. Two very funny stories, and one is kind of, not I told you so, but, well, you'll see what they are. Well, let's get to Moronica. Uh-oh, we got a moron here.
Presenting the distinguished international news commentator and foreign correspondent,
Smaulgld. This has been an extraordinary week in world affairs.
No, I told Hillary Clinton that that's moronic.
Well, this one you've probably heard already, and I'll just give you my quick take on it. This is the Gillette commercial that shows a bunch of guys acting as you typically might think: men behaving badly, boys behaving badly, kids beating each other up, guys barbecuing, guys chasing women. And the idea is, while they're engaging in this type of bad behavior, the narrator is saying that men can do better, men can be better. All right. Well, this didn't go over well with a lot of people, and even if you think that's a message that's valid, it's a razor company. I mean, why is a razor company lecturing how men behave? Imagine if you did it the reverse, you did it for women. I've written one out. I'm not going to repeat it. It's pretty funny. If you did the same thing for women, it would be deemed offensive. And you have really the big moronic here is that you have a situation now in the world where tech companies and now large consumer companies like Gillette, which is owned by Procter and Gamble, and Procter and Gamble makes stuff that you have in your house, Bounty, paper towels, Cheerios. There's so many products that they make that you use, and they seem to be using their platform as, I almost say they're monopolists, in the technology, to push a narrative when you would think that in the normal situation, companies are interested in pushing the narrative that their products are better, cheaper, more stylish, depending on the products that they're serving. For Bounty, the quicker picker-upper. That makes sense. You're trying to sell more paper towels. You want to make sure people know you get the best wipe with the paper towel. Same with razors. You want to make sure you're telling people that this new triple blade technology is the best way to get the closest shave. In the old days, they used to say then if you did that, all the women would come to you. Now, of course, they don't do that anymore. But the idea here that they do this little mini minute-and-a-half movie that's saying that we men have to stop behaving badly. Well, the reaction there is, well, maybe we have to stop buying your razor blades. And I'm not sure. I think what's happened is when companies have become so large that they almost have a built-in market share that they don't really care. They can, or they care, and they just decide they can push this narrative. But it all seems, it's very strange, that all of the large companies seem to have this, how you describe it, I don't know if it's Marxist or leftist, but it's clearly a progressive, that's the word, a progressive style message that they feel that's part of the product. Now, I don't mind it from Starbucks because Starbucks is not about the coffee. Starbucks is about the experience. If Starbucks, you want to go there, you want to sit and talk progressively with each other and hold on, be seen with the coffee. It's a part of an experience. That makes sense. Shaving is not. It's between you and the razor. Make sure you don't get cut looking at the mirror. It's not about some type of new world order that you're going to engage in when you're shaving. So it almost seems like this is really ridiculous, but you have to wonder why they want to push this kind of stuff. I think it's beyond moronic. I think it's out of their place, I think, to do this. Now, in a capitalist society, they could do whatever they want. The business judgment, if they want to get up there and they want to talk about petunias, instead of advertising their Gillette shavers, they want, and sometimes marketing, like Nike, also understandable if they want to go in this type of route, because they're not really selling sneakers. They're selling some type of image, some type of lifestyle. But again, you don't shave in public. No one sees you with your Gillette razor. It's really people, when they buy a razor, and they don't care about this stuff. Now, Nike, they might. You might want to go into a Starbucks and virtue signal with your Nikes on and have conversation with other people. That's great. Then the marketing should be pushed in that direction. And then you could choose to go in there with your Nikes or not go into a Starbucks at all. But these consumer products, I think it's pretty disturbing when they start trying to change men's behavior. And again, if there was a commercial out there trying to change women's behavior or any ethnic group's behavior, it would be deemed offensive. But in this case, it seems that it's the men, the toxic masculinity that we have to worry about. And even if you need to worry about it, Gillette's not the best venue to push that through. And I think I said here today, yep, Gillette jumped the razor. It's not, I don't understand why they did it. And I guess, there's a thing in marketing, getting people to talk about it is a good thing. I don't know. Getting people to trash your product is probably not a good thing. But we'll see how it turns out for them. And again, they're part of Procter and Gamble, so I'm not sure any of this is going to really harm them at all. Now, there's things like Red Lobster, small restaurants that are owned by venture capitalists. They could get hurt when they do this type of thing, but I don't think this is going to impact Gillette at all. This one is clearly moronic. This guy, David Webb, is talking to somebody And I don't know, he's making whatever point he's making. And his interlocutor is a woman. And she claims, well, he can say that because he's got white privilege. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, you know, you're allowed, you got along and you're doing well because of white privilege. And he says, hate to break it to you, but you should have been better prepped because I'm black. This is on a radio interview. But they had a lively discussion. She apologized. But I think that one takes the cake because she had made assumptions. I don't know if it was because of the way he sounded or whatever it was, or he was just successful in some ways and he felt that color had nothing to do with it and she was having none of it. And she went straight to the white privilege and didn't end well for her. And before we move on to the Bill Barr discussion, this one's not surprising. John Kasich, former governor of Ohio, just left a couple of weeks ago. He joined CNN as a commentator. That ought to be fun. All right, let's now go to Bill Barr. Now, Bill Barr, if you don't know, is the nominee to replace the acting Attorney General Whitaker. And he has to go through a confirmation hearing with the Senate. That's part of the process, that through the advice and consent of the Senate, the president gets to pick his cabinet and certain key employees. And he's picked this guy, Bill Barr. Now, Bill Barr, you got to look at his background. He was the Attorney General for George Herbert Walker Bush. He's been around a while, and he's been in private practice now. And he had written an article, not an article, he had actually written like a law brief. I guess he's really a law nerd, to Rod Rosenstein a year or so ago, explaining why, in his view, that there should not be any issue of obstruction of justice solely on the fact that Donald Trump had fired Bill Comey. And that, of course, makes people think, well, he should recuse himself. He's already got a view on it. And it's interesting that that particular point is what got raised just a few days ago in the New York Times, that when Trump fired Bill Comey, that's what put the FBI into action and decided that Trump should be investigated for being a Russian stooge. Now, Barr's point is that this is part and parcel of your job, and it would be very dangerous to say that a president can't fire people that report to him. That would effectively take away his constitutional authority. That's what the president's supposed to do. That would be like saying that congressmen can't fire the people that work for him. They've got to be protected. So going into this confirmation hearing, it's very clear what's happening is the Democrats know that there is a Mueller investigation, and they're either hopeful or convinced that Trump indeed is some type of Russian spy and that he is colluded with the Russians. They want to make sure that Mueller has his reign to complete this. On the Republican side, many of them are of the view that the investigation never should have been started because it was started without a proper predicate, meaning that there was no evidence provided to indicate that an investigation was warranted into the president. And they've got this through the various documents that they have, some of them in the own words of the people that worked at the FBI. Peter Strzok saying, I don't think there's a there there. They didn't really show any, and in the FISA warrant, what they've seen, they believe that this was concocted in order to get an investigation into Trump. And this was all politically motivated. And on that side of the ledger, they do have a lot of politically biased statements showing animus towards the president. So it leads the Republicans to believe that they concocted this whole thing as a hoax in order to go on a witch hunt against Trump and to discredit him as being a Russian spy, someone working for the Russians, or worse, a traitor, and therefore he should be removed from office. So that's what the Democrats want to happen. Republicans think that it is something they want to happen because, in a sense, they've made it up. So the Senate Judiciary Committee, I think it's the Judiciary Committee that met. Yeah, because it was Flimsy Graham is now the head of that. And he led the questioning, and the way that works is he calls on a Democrat, then a Republican, and they ask Barr questions. So I'm going to give you an overview of how the questioning went, but keep in mind what it really was the Democrats trying to get assurance that Barr was going to allow Mueller to do basically whatever he wanted. And the Democrats want to make sure that Barr goes back and looks at how the investigation got started, whether it was a proper predicate. They want to go back and look at some of the things and how they handled the Clinton email investigation, because in a sense the two are tied because they overlapped, where they somewhat dropped the ball and just left the Hillary Clinton investigation, exonerated her, and moved straight into investigating Russia. And then, of course, there's the added elements of the Horowitz Inspector General's report, which is going to come out about how the FISA application was handled. He's already put out a report on how the Hillary Clinton email investigation was handled. And then there's supposedly stuff going on with this guy Huber, an attorney out in Utah, which appears that much is happening, that Sessions had appointed. Okay, so Graham opens up, and he raises the questions initially from Barr and asks him if he's going to look into what some of these emails and between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok were FBI agents, and he was an FBI agent who led the Clinton email investigation, and Page was his paramour and also a FBI attorney. And there's emails going back, text going back and forth about how much they hate Donald Trump, how he has to be stopped. They need an insurance policy if he does get in. Call him a loathsome individual. So they're really against him. And Graham asked Barr, what do you think about that? He said, well, that gives me cause for concern. He said, will you look into that? He says, yes. And then he asked him if he's going to look into how the Clinton investigation was handled. Now, the Clinton investigation, forget the outcome. The way it was handled, and the Inspector General report made this very clear. James Comey did so many things wrong in that it doesn't matter whether you think Hillary Clinton should have been exonerated or not. He just did whatever. The FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It doesn't decide whether someone gets prosecuted. Also, he comes out after the investigation is completed, and instead of turning over his findings to the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, who in turn is supposed to make a determination, he just said, well, we're not going to do it. And he also publicly stated all the things that he said that Hillary Clinton had done. And which were all damning. You don't bring somebody out there and in a press conference and spend 12, 15 minutes explaining all the bad things someone does, and then says, as the FBI director, we're not going to not recommend prosecuting. We're just not going to do it. That's not his role. And then supposedly there had been other emails that they didn't look at. He had at the time. Then he realized they might get out, and then he said, well, these emails that were on Yuma Abedin and Weiner, her husband's laptop that had Hillary Clinton stuff on it. We just discovered that, and we're going to have to open the investigation again. And he's doing this in the middle of a presidential campaign. And he's, because he created this issue, he's out there saying everything she had done wrong, we're not going to prosecute. Then he says, oh, we're going to open up the investigation again. It's beyond amateur hour. It's total outside of how the protocol of how the FBI works. And then add to it, you've got all these other issues with Strzok and Page and the appearance of bias. And so Graham asked Barr if he's going to look into that. He said yes. Then he asked him about the FISA warrant. Now, the FISA warrant's been a big deal for the Republicans because apparently the FISA warrant is what the FBI goes to these foreign surveillance courts in order to get a warrant to spy on American citizens. And apparently the bulk of the evidence or the supporting documentation to get the warrant is based on what's called the Steele dossier, which many say has unverified, in Comey's own words, salacious information, and should not have served as the basis to get the FISA warrant. And not only did they get it, they had to up it a few times. Only has I don't know, maybe it's a month or so lifespan, and you got to go back and say, yeah, we're still on the case. And Rod Rosenstein signed the last one, this last warrant, and Graham asked him, will you look into that? And he said he would. And then he asked him about Bruce and Nellie Orr, who also Bruce worked at the FBI. His wife worked for Fusion GPS. This is where the Steele dossier comes from. And he said he would look into all that as well. And then he added, and he said this a couple of times, he said that the rule of law requires equal application. And he mentioned it in this instance, and then he mentioned it again later when we were talking about Uranium One. He seems to believe, and this isn't even partisan, that if you're going to look at these things about Trump, well, then you probably have to look at these things about Hillary. And he also went to great pains to say he's against this politicalization and weaponization of these agencies to go after political opponents. He says, and it was very good what he said. He said, I don't like this idea of lock her up. Now, which also means he doesn't like the idea of going after Trump. But then the other thing he said was he doesn't believe that Mueller's engaged in a witch hunt. So he gave a lot of not necessarily contradictory answers. I think what he did was very clever. He did not want to prejudge the Mueller investigation, but he did, when asked, say he was concerned about certain aspects of the Mueller investigation. So, for example, let me see if I have my quick notes here from, I think it was with Blumenthal. The things he was saying was that Blumenthal is a senator, and he was asking him, do you find it stomach-turning that the president would be under investigation? And this was a very telling exchange. He said, wouldn't the FBI have procedures in place to initiate such an investigation? Now remember, Barr is saying that he doesn't think Mueller's involved in a witch hunt. He thinks that Mueller's a decent guy. Rosenstein's a decent guy. And he said, well, yeah, you would think so. But he didn't say that the fact that an investigation was opened, that necessarily it meant that it was opened properly, because he'd already committed to saying, I want to know the predicate for which it was open. Now, he doesn't know this. He hasn't seen the scope memos. He hasn't seen all the documentations. But he's playing along as if we have to assume that if the FBI is investigating the president, that they went through these proper procedures. But he is aware of the bias that was involved, and he's not closing the door on the fact that there may have been some falsification of documents in order to get the investigation going. And he said, I would hope so. And he also very cleverly, instead of saying he found that the president was under investigation to be stomach-turning, he said he found the text messages between Strzok and Page stomach-turning. And then he also talked about this New York Times story. And this ties into the weaponization of the FBI. Remember, in that New York Times story, it said that when Trump fired Comey, the FBI then decided they needed to investigate Trump because they had seen it on the campaign trail that he had never criticized Russia or Putin, that the Republican committee took out of the platform the fact that they might arm the Ukrainians against the Russians. And he noted that it's not the FBI's job to go and challenge a candidate or a president's policy. I mean, if the president comes in and wants to trash Russia, wants to trash China, wants to be buddies with China, wants to be buddies with Russia, it's not the FBI's job. And he actually went through that this was law, that's what the president's, it's constitutional, that's what his job is, and it's not up to the FBI to challenge what the president is doing. And because he fired, and this ties into his other point, just because he fired Comey, that doesn't mean it's obstruction of justice. But what the FBI is trying to justify is that firing Comey was an obstruction of justice, and because Trump had a certain view towards the Russians, that he's a spy and a stooge. Well, those are long putts, really. I'm not sure that they will withstand scrutiny other than partisan scrutiny, where you want to believe that Trump is the bad guy. And then also the other things that Democrats kept trying to get Barr to say was that, they're trying to get him to say bad things about Trump. And he stood by the idea that he thought that at some points along the border, security needed to be tightened up. And he indicated clearly that that would include a barrier or a wall of some point, of some sort. Now here's another. This is the best exchange, very subtle. Senator Pat Leahy from Vermont tried to goad him on, look, we've got this shutdown, it's harming law enforcement, and wink, wink, you're the head law enforcement guy. Don't you hate that? Don't you hate the fact that, you're going to be working for a guy who could shut down your agency and then you can't do law enforcement? So Leahy says, doesn't a shutdown have an impact on law enforcement? And Barr quickly retorted, not having a wall has an impact on law enforcement. And again, he said and this time in turn with Leahy, he was talking about the application of justice being even-handed and the need for it to be even-handed. And he said the standard for triggering an investigation should be instituted even-handedly, inferring in a way that perhaps the Trump investigation into Russian collusion wasn't instituted even-handedly. And he was referring to Uranium One. And he didn't want to say Uranium One should be investigated. He was saying, as a private citizen, when he was looking at this, there appeared to be things about Uranium One that one might think there was something there that they should look at it, but they didn't. And yet they chose to look into Trump when there doesn't appear to be any reason for them to have done so, at least as far as he knew as a private citizen. So he's giving the right answers, trying to appear as if, from where he sits, he's assuming no one has done anything wrong, but he has seen some troubling indications that maybe justice has not been approached, applied, or initiated even-handedly. And I think that's a good sign, and I think the best sign is not the partisan sign, is no one should want. What has happened is the Democrats so hate Trump, they don't care how they get rid of him. They don't care if they have to apply things in an underhanded or not even-handed manner. They just want him gone, and that's the end justifies the means. Now, if you're running the Department of Justice or the FBI, your job isn't to take out the president or to take out your political opponents. He made that point a number of times that he doesn't like that. Now, what I think is going to happen is he's going to clean this up, but it's going to be just like the way they clean up manipulation at the banks. No one's going to go to jail. No one's going to get in trouble, but they're going to put in safeguards, and people might get more people might get fired. Now, however, there was news today that James Baker, the FBI General Counsel, is subject to a criminal leak investigation. Now, one of the things that FBI, the Obama FBI, did a lot of were leaks. And the reason they do leaks is to get the information out, and they use the media to create the narrative that they want created. And McCabe was also fired, same thing, and he's under criminal investigation, or there's a criminal referral out for him. So that's something that has to stop, that these types of politicalization of investigations. Because if you're doing an investigation, you're doing an investigation. You're not trying to prejudge the public on what it is. It's the investigation, and that's all the FBI is supposed to do. They're not supposed to be talking to the media and letting them know how things might happen. You're certainly not supposed to do what Comey does, go out and give a press conference and explain everything Hillary Clinton has done wrong, and then say, well, but no reasonable prosecutor, whatever. I mean, would ever bring that case. When people are listening for 12 minutes, you're thinking, she's toast. All they have to do now is bring the case. And then he says he's not going to bring it. And all these leaks, this is something that is not good, because the leaks are designed to create a narrative in their favor. And again, the FBI is not supposed to want any narrative to be, if they're objective and if they're fair, they don't want the narrative out there that, look, Trump's a really bad guy and we got the dirt on him, and then the BuzzFeed and the New York Times and the Washington Post put all this information out there that lets you believe that, oh, this guy's a bad guy. Now, what they're doing is they may not be able to get their case against him, but they're building a public case against him, trying to destroy him in the polls. People think that he's, you put him in a bad light, even if you can't get him legally. And that, again, that's not the FBI's job. But when you have these people working in government for years and they all know each other, they figure that's kind of what their job is. Also, I forgot who he was talking to, but Barr said he wasn't sure what the predicate for the institution of the Mueller investigation was. He says if he's confirmed, he will find out. Now, that's actually taking a look at the appointment documents for the special counsel and then looking at all of the text messages leading up to the creation of the FISA warrants. It's looking at the FISA warrants. It's looking at the unredacted FISA warrants and finding out whether there should have been an investigation or not. Now, at that point, he may decide just to let Mueller finish the investigation. But remember, Mueller's reporting to him. Mueller will finish up a report and give it to him. And the Democrats wanted to know, will he make it public? And of course, he's not going to make it public. And they're really trying to push, they were trying to push Barr in questioning to say not only would he not fire Mueller, that he would disclose all the information, and that he would not fire any other attorneys that may be working on other things going against Trump. They were really looking for him to say, yeah, I'm not really going to be an attorney general. I'm just going to let all these people that are working for me, who are investigating Trump for whatever reason, if it's just politicalization, if they're just going after him, I'm just going to I won't fire anybody. And he didn't commit to that, nor should he. Because again, people seem to believe that, well, if the FBI investigated it and they concluded, that's good enough for them. And in the Hillary Clinton email investigation, that's what a lot of people, if they're a partisan type, think, well, that's fine. Hey, it's an FBI investigation. FBI found her not guilty, so therefore nothing to see here. We don't need to look at the procedures. We got the result we wanted. And I think Barr is appearing to be even-handed, and he's saying he doesn't want to go after Hillary Clinton. He doesn't want to go after anybody. He wants to make sure that there's equal application of, now, everybody, and this is the problem. This is why the old James Madison, if men were angels, you wouldn't need all this stuff. But you have to at least strive towards objectivity in the law and strive towards some semblance of appearance of a non-bias. And clearly, we've lost that. Lock her up on the one side and then, impeach Trump, impeach 45. Impeach him for what? Oh, the Mueller investigation. What about the Mueller investigation? Oh, it doesn't matter. He's a traitor. I mean, and that's essentially what you have, is you figure those things are fine in the political arena. You don't expect, that's not the law. That's rhetoric. He's an idiot, you're an idiot, and you can debate back and forth who's the bigger idiot and who's the worst person, and that's a political, low-level political discussion. But when it comes down to then taking those points of view and weaponizing them into the Department of Justice, the CIA, the FBI, that's a bigger problem. And if you don't see that as a problem, just wait until it turns around on you. Once you set the precedent that you can go after Trump with the FBI, the CIA, well, what happens if that fails and Trump is a really bad guy, as you say he is, and he appoints a bunch of people to the FBI, the CIA, and they go after you? And you say, hey, it's the FBI, they found you guilty, off to the gulag. All right, so Barr also said the firing Comey based on the Rosenstein memo. Remember, Rosenstein wrote the memo that said that Comey should be fired. And the memo was called Restoring Confidence in the FBI. And he said, yes, that memo that Rosenstein wrote was proper. Again, pointing to the things that Comey had done that really lost a lot of confidence for a lot of people, not just because of the result and his ultimate conclusion, but the way he went about it. And then Maggie Hirono, the senator from Hawaii, was there, and she was trying to get him to say that Trump obstructed justice for firing Comey, and he stood by his view that, no, the president can fire whomever he wants. Let's see. I think we've got all of the... Yes, that's it. Oh, one other thing that Barr mentioned. Gave away a bit of his hand here, too. He said that China is the U.S. biggest rival, not Russia. And he says there's a fixation on Russia, which leads him to believe that Russia became a bigger rival so that they could attach it to Trump, meaning that Trump and Russia collusion, well, if they're colluding, then Russia's got to be the bad one, and we have to make Russia out to be the problem, but at the same time, not paying attention, perhaps, to some of the hacking and some of the other things going on with China that the FBI perhaps should be paying more attention to than to be worrying about Trump-Russia collusion. Well, let's see what you guys think. I think that what's going to happen is he is not going to be Q my mom, QAnon, 10,000 sealed indictments. Nothing can stop what is coming. I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think he's going to go and try to arrest everybody and throw everyone in jail. I think what he's going to try to do... Remember, he's a creature of this whole environment. He's been in government before. He doesn't want to damage the institutions. I think what he wants to do is he wants to make sure that you don't have these types of witch hunts. Now, he's saying that Mueller would never do a witch hunt, but I don't think he's going to... The way he's going to get around that, it's not Mueller that did the witch hunt. It was all of this other stuff that led to the Mueller appointment. And he pretty much said that he's going to look into everything. And obviously, if he looks into it and he sees what's there, he's not necessarily going to act on it in a scorched earth way, but he is going to make it public. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to change anyone's minds, because they're just going to say, well, it's a Trump guy, he's saying all this stuff. And if no one gets in trouble for it, then there's really no display. So I'm not sure he'll be able to restore any confidence. But what he may end up doing, which would be a positive, is not necessarily restoring confidence, but making sure that the Department of Justice, FBI, operate a little bit more towards protocol, and that it's not going to be a department that is used solely to go after, or at the top, to go after political opponents. I think that's really what he's striving for. I don't think he's in there to go back and open up cases and have the Hillary Clinton email and go after Obama and do any of that. And I also think that he's going to look at the Mueller special counsel information, and he'll learn whether that was a properly predicated investigation, and again determine whether we ever have these types of special counsels again. Because in this instance, the first thing I thought of was, unless you have a specific crime, then rather than appointing a special counsel just to go after Donald Trump, you would have a counterintelligence probe where the department would look at Russian meddling across the board, not necessarily as it had to do with Trump, because tying it to Trump is more political and it's done to damage him, rather than looking at all the possible things that Russia did. And also, as he says here, China is the biggest rival, and we know it's not just Russia that is trying to interfere in the U.S. elections. They've been doing that for decades, and so is China, and so have others. And time better spent is probably determining how to shore up meddling, not just through social media, but through ballot boxes, media, and so on, with all these foreign adversaries. Well, let's take a look and see what you guys have been saying, chatting amongst yourself. Tomorrow I want to get to the Shanghai Gold Exchange withdrawals for the year, so I do have that prepared, but I wanted to cover this as it was more timely. All right. Eli is here. Max Strong is here. Pablo Pena is here too. The good old PPT, hard at work, says Jeffrey Gotts. Yes, indeed. Keeping that stock market high. I wish my keyboard had a PPT, says Jeffrey Gotts. Pablo Pena. This is Putin decoy. He's going to silently buy Smaulgld mugs. Yes. I'm going to send out a huge order to the Kremlin. BTC down due to news, says Pablo Pena. Yeah. Yes, and Holloman. Ethereum's Constantinople upgrade delayed due to security issues. Yeah, and Ethereum wasn't down much more than the others. That's that fork you're talking about. So I think these things just go up and down when they feel like it. Yes, and Cryptopia Exchange in New Zealand was hacked and is still shut down while the police investigate over 2 million loss of Ethereum. That was another hack that happened in New Zealand. But that news was out earlier in the day. The beatdown on the cryptos and happened later. I don't know if it's just a matter. I find it odd because they all have, they're not all the same. They have different, I don't know if you can call them fundamentals. But I've watched this. I have the parallel screens up and I see them, like Bitcoin and Litecoin, fall precisely at the same time. They have a different profile. There's no reason, and a lot of people say, well, when Bitcoin falls, it's because of Mt. Gox selling. Okay, but that's got nothing to do with selling Litecoin. I don't know. I just find it odd that they all seem to fall at the same time, rise at the same time. When I say the same time, I mean precisely at the same time. When there's a sell-off going on in one, they're all selling off. I don't necessarily know which one leads. What I was happy to see a few weeks ago, they weren't tracking each other. Litecoin went up for no reason and the others didn't. And then Stellar went down and the others didn't go down. And then Bitcoin went up later. But now, the last week or so, they seem to be tracking in tandem. Yep, Cryptopia's out of New Zealand. Max Strong, Gillette is not the best a man can get. Max Strong, leftists are the HR department of crony capitalists. Well, that's what it is, and there seems to be a concentration now. I mean, I mentioned Procter & Gamble. They make so much stuff like you would consider staple items that they kind of can get away with this. You might say, I'm not going to buy Gillette, and then you go and you buy Bounty. You go and you buy Purcell shampoo. You don't even know this. I mean, I saw a chart on, I should have published it. They have like 500 products. Toblerone candy, Nestle. They have so many different household items, laundry detergent, that they're not going to be harmed. So they're just out there and they have a dual purpose to put out their propaganda or whatever it is. Let's see. Kasich, yeah. Max, I don't know. I think Kasich thinks he's going to run for I don't know if he can run for president. The Republicans that like Flake and Romney and Kasich, they try to appeal. The Democrats don't like them. They only like them to the extent that they bash other Republicans that they don't like. And the sassy guy is the same way. Lion James Comey, says Scott Wardell. Dirty cop James Comey. Eli, Barr kind of comes across as a tough, smart one in a good way. That was my impression. I've never seen him before. I did read his memo. He appears to be a thoughtful lawyer. He doesn't appear to be... It's just good. He didn't act like I don't have any opinions. He did mention that there's a part of the job of being Attorney General where you are considering the politics of the decision. That's part of the job. Not in just simple decisions of right or wrong. But he did mention that, and he did state he's for the wall. And he also stated, when they kept saying, it's Trump, he said there's both sides here. are to blame. And I think that's the right way of going. But he also said he would not stand for Trump trying to fire people just because they were going after him. So I was pleased with him, not from a partisan perspective, but I thought he seems to be a guy of substance. I never thought Sessions was of anything. I don't know. Sessions just appeared to be, I want to be Attorney General. It's almost like he was a child who never got to play lawyer. I don't know. This guy seems to know what he's doing. He was the Attorney General before. The other thing they tried to make it sound like was he wrote that memo about Rosenstein shouldn't be looking at obstruction of justice, or Mueller shouldn't be looking at obstruction of justice for firing Comey. James Comey. I kept calling him Bill Comey earlier today. James Comey, as a way of attracting attention from Trump so that he could get the job. And he was like, give me a break. I'm like 70 years old. I don't need to get back into law here, into this government. I really like to do the job. There's other ways, if I was really interested in grandstanding or virtue signaling to Trump, I could have done it, he said. And I believe him. I think he's just a guy who's interested in issues of law. And then I think it was Leahy or Blumenthal. One of them was saying, is that I want to know who helped you write that memo and who helped you site check. And he said, no, I do my own site checking. They're trying to make it sound like he's part of some group that's trying to undermine the Mueller campaign and the Mueller investigation. I don't think so. I think the reason Trump picked him is precisely the way he acted today. I mean, if he had picked Rudy Giuliani, the guy is, clearly biased in favor of Trump, and he would go after people. And I think that would be divisive, and that's not the point of the Attorney General. Not to say that we haven't had them, like with Obama's Attorney General, not Loretta Lynch, but the other one, Holder. I mean, he was divisive. He was held in contempt of Congress. All right. And me and Loretta never talked to each other. I had no idea what McCabe and Strzok and Page did, but I'm incompetent. I should have been fired. Yeah, Loretta, I mean, if you really wanted to clean house, I think these guys, the way they look at it is they're spent assets, they're gone. Let's let them off with a warning, and going forward, let's make sure these things don't happen. Now, that doesn't mean they won't happen again, but I do think there has been a significant personnel change. But remember, they don't go away, these people. They get on CNN, they're out there, and they're just waiting for an opportunity for change of administration to get back in again. So if they were thrown in jail, probably a good thing, and would send a message. But you could see a day if Trump loses in 2020, any of the Democratic presidents might reinstate a lot of these people, Sally Yates, or Strzok, Page, and so on. Yes, exactly, says Scott. No heads will roll. Yep. Pablo, if this comes down to false accusations on the presidents from these organizations, isn't that treason? I'm sure Trump has or is protected by other shadow agents gathering intel. Yes, the thing that Trump has on his side is he already knows all the answers to all these questions. If he has half a brain and he can declassify these documents, means he should have read them. He should know that the FISA warrant either was or wasn't a proper basis for a predicate to investigate him. And I would imagine that from what people have said who've seen it, that there's not much in there to indicate, well, we better investigate this guy. We better put a wire on that guy. So he probably knows all this, and that's why a lot of people say he's out there saying all this stuff because he's scared because Mueller's coming to get him. Now, he should be scared because when you have the most powerful government in the world with unlimited resources, if they want to nail you for something, they will. Gott says, never keep your coins on an exchange. People have been saying this for years, and people still keep coins on the exchange. This is why Trace Meyer started proof of keys every year since January 3rd. Yep. Ann says, 4.7 earthquake off the coast of Virginia Beach. Pablo, Putin, KGB, or Israeli Mossad? That I don't know. Scott says he's in North Carolina. He didn't feel anything. 4.7 is a pretty big deal for an earthquake. All right. Let's see what else we got here. 6:30 tonight. So before Smaulgld came on, you guys are shaking down south. All right, well, it looks like that's it for tonight for the comments. I want to thank you for joining me. Tomorrow night, we're going to do the Shanghai Gold Exchange numbers and get into some Chinese gold demand and take a look at that. So thank you very much, and we will see you tomorrow.